Did you spend years insisting loyalty is everything, only to suddenly remember that prison exists? Have you ever looked at a mountain of evidence and thought, maybe today's the day I become extremely cooperative? Then you need the Omerta memory eraser, the only product scientifically engineered to transform. I swore an oath into... Well, let me explain. With one easy application, you'll experience amazing side effects like, those weren't murders. They were business decisions. I was actually the reasonable one, and somehow everyone else was the real problem. Amazing. Listen to these satisfied customers. Michael Franzesi. I used to believe silence was sacred. Then I discovered federal sentencing guidelines. Thanks, Omerta Memory Eraser, TM. Mikey Scars. I couldn't remember where my loyalty went. Then I looked at the plea agreement. Now everything makes perfect sense. Still not convinced? Order today. And we'll include our deluxe narrative rewriter. Simply insert yourself into any story. Press the convenient self-justify button. And watch years of questionable decisions magically become complicated circumstances. It's almost unbelievable. Just don't ask too many follow-up questions. Operators are standing by. Probably. Disclaimer. Omerta Memory Eraser does not erase wiretaps, FBI recordings, sworn testimony, court documents, public records, personal responsibility, or the consequences of criminal behavior. Side effects may include selective memory, excessive rationalization, podcast appearances, autobiography syndrome, and an uncontrollable urge to describe yourself as just being honest now. If your version of events changes more than 4 times in a single interview, consult a historian immediately. Pizza versus Studios. Because if you're going to rewrite history, someone else is probably going to fact check it.
We invite you to settle in for the story of Frank Sheeran, the Irishman, the truck driver who claimed he became a mafia hitman, the union enforcer who said he killed Jimmy Hoffa, the old man who confessed to crimes that shaped American history. But what if the story you think you know is never true? What if the man Hollywood immortalized wasn't the assassin at all, but a storyteller chasing relevance in the twilight of his life? Prepare to step into one of the most controversial confessions in American crime history. The man who said he killed Jimmy Hoffa. The man investigators never believed. The making of Frank Sheeran, truck driver, veteran, union man. The old man leans forward in his chair, hands folded, eyes steady. His voice is calm, too calm. He is about to claim he killed one of the most powerful men in America. But before we let him pull the trigger in that quiet Detroit house, we need to go back. Back to a small town in Pennsylvania. Back to a boy who wasn't born into the mafia, wasn't raised in its language, and wasn't supposed to stand anywhere near its inner circle. Frank Sheeran was born in 1920 in Darby, Pennsylvania, a working-class town just outside Philadelphia. Row houses, factory smoke, church bells on Sunday mornings. His family was Irish Catholic, not Italian. That detail matters more than it sounds. In the American Mafia, bloodlines were walls. If you weren't Italian, you could stand near the door, but you were never invited into the inner room. You could earn money, you could earn trust, but you could never be made, never sworn in, never fully protected. Frank grew up hard, but not romantic hard, not movie hard. There were no secret ceremonies in candlelit basements, just discipline, church, school, work. His father was strict, physical, the kind of man who believed pain was a lesson that left no confusion. Young Frank learned early that strength meant survival, and silence meant safety. Then came the war. In 1941, he entered the United States Army. By the time it ended, he would serve more than 400 days in combat. That number isn't just impressive, it's brutal. 400 days of mud, blood, and noise. 400 days where hesitation meant death. He fought in Europe, Italy, France, Germany. The front lines don't just teach you how to shoot, they teach you how to stop feeling. Years later, military records would show something else. Court-martial proceedings. He admitted to shooting prisoners. Unauthorized killings. But context matters. The war was chaos. Soldiers were ordered to keep moving. Prisoners slowed things down. Executions happened. Some were sanctioned, some were not. The paperwork tells part of the story. The fog tells the rest. Was he a monster? Or just a soldier shaped by a system that demanded speed over mercy? The truth sits somewhere in the gray. What is certain is this: the war changed him. It strips something away. Combat doesn't just train your hands, it rewires your mind. Violence becomes procedural. Emotional distance becomes armor. And when you come home, normal life feels slower, softer, almost unreal. After the war, Frank didn't step into a crime family. He stepped into a truck. He became a driver, hauling meat, long routes, early mornings, empty highways stretching like ribbons of asphalt across the Northeast. It was steady work, honest, technically, but trucking had its own ecosystem. And that ecosystem revolved around one powerful institution, the Teamsters. He joined Teamsters Local 326. The union wasn't just about wages. It was muscle, influence, power disguised as paperwork. If you controlled the drivers, you controlled the arteries of the economy. And if you controlled the union, you controlled the drivers. Frank was big, solid, intimidating without trying. The kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice. When disputes broke out, delayed payments, broken contracts, employers cutting corners, someone had to show up and make sure negotiations went the right way. That someone was often Frank. He didn't wear a silk suit, didn't sit in social clubs under portraits of Sicilian saints. He showed up at loading docks, warehouse offices, parking lots, and he stood there, quiet, waiting. His presence was a message. Not theatrical, not flashy, just firm. In labor disputes, intimidation works like gravity. You don't see it, but you feel it pulling everything into place. Frank became useful, not famous, not feared across cities. Useful. There's a difference. He started doing small favors, delivering envelopes, collecting debts, applying pressure where needed. It wasn't cinematic violence. It was transactional, measured. He was an associate, a freelancer orbiting larger bodies of power. And this is where the myth begins to drift away from the man. Frank Sheeran was never a made member of an Italian mafia family. That door was closed from birth. The mafia is structured like a fortress built from ancestry. To be made, you needed Italian blood, usually Sicilian. The ceremony was sacred, a burning saint card, an oath of loyalty, a life bound to a family. Frank never took that oath. He stood outside it. He worked with them. Yes. Sat at tables. Yes. Earned trust. Yes. But being an associate is like being invited into the kitchen, not the throne room. You can cook the meal. You can clean the knives. But you don't decide the menu. His power didn't come from hierarchy. It came from labor connections. Through the Teamsters, he was near influence, near money, near conversations that shaped cities. The union pension funds were massive, billions eventually. Loans flowed into construction, casinos, real estate. Where money moves, Organized crime follows. And Frank was positioned at the intersection. But proximity isn't dominance. Around power. But was he central to it? That question hangs over everything that follows. By the 1950s, Frank had built a reputation as reliable muscle. The kind of man who would show up when asked. Who wouldn't panic? Who wouldn't talk? Silence became his currency. He also learned something critical. The underworld is layered. At the bottom are the loud men, the flashy ones who crave recognition. Above them are the quiet operators. And above them, almost invisible, are the real decision makers. Frank hovered somewhere in the middle. Not bottom, not top, floating. He began crossing paths with larger figures in organized crime. Italian bosses, union power players, men whose names were spoken softly in restaurants. But again, crossing paths is not commanding the room. He drove them, delivered messages, handled business that required size and steadiness. He was dependable. Dependable men get invited back. But dependable men are not automatically trusted with history-shaping assassinations. There is a tendency, especially in hindsight, to inflate, to look back and imagine inevitability. Of course he rose. Of course he became central. Of course he was the man for the job. But history isn't a straight staircase. It's a maze. Frank's early years show a man useful to power, not ruling it. A soldier shaped by war. A truck driver shaped by highways. A union enforcer shaped by pressure. Each step logical. Each step grounded. No secret coronations. He learned patience. In trucking, timing is everything. Arrive too early, you wait. Too late, you lose the load. In labor disputes, escalation must be precise. Too soft, you're ignored. Too aggressive, you trigger investigations. Frank became calibrated. And calibration is not the same as ambition. Did he crave status? Perhaps. But he didn't chase headlines. He chased relevance. There's something important here. Something that will matter later. Men who are born outside a system often spend their lives trying to prove they belong inside it. Sometimes a desire sharpens loyalty. Sometimes it feeds exaggeration. At this point in his life, there was no book deal, no interviews, no grand confessions, just a working-class veteran navigating a world where violence was a tool, not a spectacle. But underneath it all, something was building. The Teamsters were growing in power. Organized crime families were entangling themselves deeper into union structures. Pension funds became vaults. Loans became leverage. And Frank stood there, on the ground floor, watching the machinery turn. He wasn't the architect. He wasn't the boss. But he was present. And presence can feel intoxicating. In dim restaurants and union halls thick with cigarette smoke, he listened more than he spoke. Learned the rhythm of power. The pauses. The coded phrases. The unspoken rules. Like a man studying a language he wasn't born into. Yet one fact remained unmovable. He was not Italian. No matter how many favors he performed. No matter how many times he proved reliable. The inner sanctum remained sealed. So when we later hear him claim he was entrusted with one of the most sensitive murders in American history, we have to ask, would the fortress hand its keys to someone standing outside its bloodline? Or would it choose one of its own? That tension between proximity and centrality begins here. In Derby, in Europe's battlefields, on Pennsylvania highways, in Union loading docks. Frank Sheeran was real. His service was real. His labor work was real. His associations were real. But myth hasn't entered the story yet. That comes later. For now, he is simply a veteran with steady hands. A truck driver who understands pressure. An associate hovering near giants. Around power, but still outside its core. And as he edges closer to the men who truly control the underworld, one quiet introduction will change the trajectory of his life forever. Not with gunfire, with a handshake. Russell Buffalino, mentor, boss, or inflated legend. The room is quiet. Too quiet. A small gathering in upstate New York. Men in dark suits stepping carefully across gravel. No raised voices. No grand gestures. Just nods. Handshakes. Cigarette smoke drifting into autumn air. Years later, When federal agents would raid a similar meeting in a small town called Appalachian, the headlines would explode. But before that day, before the cameras, before the myth, there was a different kind of power in the room, a quieter kind. And at the center of that quiet power stood Russell Bufalino. If Frank Sheeran's story is a puzzle, Bufalino is the piece that makes it dangerous. He was not flashy, not theatrical, not the type of boss who needed a gold pinky ring the size of a marble to announce himself. He ruled the northeastern Pennsylvania crime family out of Scranton and the surrounding region, a territory that didn't scream wealth, but controlled something far more important: stability. Rail lines, truck routes, connections that stretched from New York to Detroit. He was small in stature, soft-spoken, almost forgettable at first glance. And that was exactly the point. In the underworld, the loud men often fall first. The quiet ones survive. Russell Bufalino survived. Born in Sicily in 1903, raised partly in America, he embodied that old-world discipline. His face rarely betrayed emotion. He carried himself like a man who understood that real control doesn't announce itself. It waits. It calculates. It moves only when necessary. So when Frank Sheeran later claimed that Bufalino made him, that he mentored him, trusted him, and eventually selected him for one of the most infamous murders in American history, the story felt plausible. Was Frank Sheeran Russell Bufalino's trusted inner circle assassin? Or was he a useful associate who later magnified his own importance? The difference is enormous. Their relationship, by most accounts, did exist. They met in the 1950s. One version says it happened during a trucking issue, a stolen load of meat. Sheeran claimed he fixed it. That Bufalino noticed him. That from that moment forward, a mentorship formed. It's a clean story, cinematic. Two men recognizing each other's potential in a single exchange. But real life rarely unfolds in clean narrative arcs. FBI files confirm Sheeran associated with Bufalino. They were seen together. Sheeran attended events in Bufalino's orbit. Their names appear in proximity across years of surveillance notes. That part is not fantasy. What is not confirmed, what has never been independently proven, is the depth of trust Sheeran later described. In organized crime, trust is currency. It's not given freely. It's earned slowly. Bloodlines matter. Loyalty matters. Shared risk matters. And above all, discretion matters. Bufalino was known for one defining characteristic: caution. He did not advertise. He did not overextend. He did not make impulsive decisions that would invite federal attention. He survived precisely because he understood that ego destroys empires. So ask yourself this: would a man that careful place one of the most explosive assignments in American criminal history into the hands of an Irish associate who is not a made member of his family? The mafia is not simply a criminal organization. It is structured like a medieval order. Ranks, rituals, blood oaths. The ceremony of becoming made is not symbolic. It is structural. It binds you to a family with rules as rigid as concrete. It guarantees protection and imposes obligation. It means you're inside. Frank Sheeran was never inside. He cannot be. He lacked the ancestry required for initiation. He was what they called an associate, a trusted outsider who does business with the family. Associates can earn money. Associates can gain favor. Associates can even be dangerous. But they do not sit in the inner sanctum when decisions about family-wide assassinations are made. That boundary matters. Sheeran later painted himself as Bufalino's chosen enforcer, a man so dependable that he handled sensitive work others could not. But when investigators examined decades of organized crime murders, no independent evidence ever surfaced tying Sheeran directly to a confirmed mafia hit order by Bufalino. No arrest records, no witness testimony from cooperating mobsters, no physical evidence. Contrast that with how real mafia hitmen are typically exposed. Over time, insiders flip. Trials happen. Details leak. Names are whispered in court transcripts. Patterns emerge. With Sheeran, the pattern is thinner. That doesn't mean he was harmless. It doesn't mean he wasn't involved in violence. But scale matters. Bufalino's organization was disciplined, tight, family-based. The core circle was Italian and often Sicilian. When problems required elimination, tradition favored insiders, men whose loyalty was sealed by blood ritual and family ties. There is something almost romantic about the way Sheeran described Bufalino. Calm, fatherly, strategic. In his telling, Bufalino becomes a quiet chess master, moving pieces across the board with serene confidence. And Sheeran positions himself as one of those pieces, trusted, selected, deployed. It's compelling. But compelling is not the same as corroborated. Consider Bufalino's personality. He avoided headlines. He rarely spoke publicly. He preferred distance from chaos. When law enforcement pressure increased in the 1950s, especially after the infamous Appalachian meeting was raided in 1957, Bufalino retreated even further into discretion. That raid changed everything. Police stumbled upon dozens of top mafia figures meeting at a rural New York estate. The image of organized crime as a national network suddenly crystallized in the public mind. Men were arrested, photographed, identified. Bufalino was there. After that day, every major boss understood something. Visibility is vulnerability. From that point forward, would Bufalino increase his reliance on a non-Italian associate for high-profile murder assignments that could destabilize the entire structure? Or would he shrink his circle tighter? Investigators lean toward the latter. Frank Sheeran's real influence appears strongest in the labor world. He was effective in Teamsters matters. He applied pressure where needed. He served as a bridge between union disputes and organized crime interests. That made him valuable. But valuable is not equivalent to indispensable. There is also the psychological dimension. Imagine being an associate orbiting powerful men for decades, sitting at tables but never fully inside, witnessing decisions that shape cities but not casting the deciding vote. That proximity can distort perspective. Over time, being near power can feel like wielding it. When Sheeran later spoke about Bufalino, he described private conversations, strategic planning, intimate trust. Yet none of Bufalino's confirmed close family members ever publicly supported those claims. No documented inner circle testimony elevates Sheeran to primary enforcer status. Instead, he appears as one of many associates who operated around Bufalino's influence. It is important not to swing too far in the opposite direction. Sheeran was not an outsider in the casual sense. He wasn't a stranger knocking on doors. He was embedded in union networks that overlapped with mafia interests. He traveled. He attended gatherings. He had access. Access is real. But in the architecture of organized crime, there are rooms within rooms. You might be allowed into the lobby. You might even be allowed into the hallway. But the room where irreversible decisions are made, that room is smaller than people think. And Bufalino understood that better than almost anyone. His leadership style was defined by insulation, layers between himself and direct action, buffers, intermediaries, plausible deniability long before the term became fashionable. If a murder needed to happen, it would pass through channels, through captains, through soldiers, through men bound by oath. Rarely would a boss personally assign it to an associate without lineage protection. So why did Sheeran later claim otherwise? The answer may lie in something subtle. Legacy. By the time Sheeran began telling his story in detail, he was an old man. Health failing. Relevance fading. The mafia landscape had changed. Trials had reshaped families. The Teamsters had evolved. The men who once held rooms in silence were gone or imprisoned. In that twilight, proximity can become memory's raw material. Being close to Bufalino becomes being trusted by Bufalino. Being present during discussions becomes being instrumental in decisions. Being a piece on the board becomes believing you were the hand that moved it. There is no evidence that Bufalino ever publicly endorsed Sheeran's claims. And after Bufalino's death in 1994, the silence remained intact. Silence can mean many things. Loyalty, indifference, or the simple absence of confirmation. One more detail complicates the narrative. Bufalino was cautious to the point of paranoia. He distrusted volatility. He preferred predictability. When disputes arose between union leadership and mafia interests, he navigated them carefully. He did not rush into irreversible actions unless he believed stability demanded it. Which brings us to the looming shadow of Jimmy Hoffa. If Buffalino had a role in Hoffa's fate, it would have been calculated, not emotional, not reckless, and certainly not entrusted lightly. Would he assign that responsibility to a non-Italian associate whose membership in the core structure was never formalized? That question grows louder the deeper we look. And yet, the image persists. The quiet Sicilian boss, the Irish veteran enforcer, the handshake that sealed trust. It feels like myth carved in stone. But myths are often built on fragments of truth stretched until they resemble destiny. Frank Sheeran was around power. That is documented. He sat near Russell Buffalino. He operated within his sphere. He likely benefited from the association. But being near a king does not make you the executioner. As this story moves forward, we will see how Sheeran's claims escalate, how proximity transforms into authorship, how association evolves into confession. But before we step into the disappearance that would define his legend, we have to hold on to this central uncertainty. Russell Buffalino was real power. Frank Sheeran was near him. The distance between those two facts may be smaller than it appears, or it may be the difference between truth and self-invention. And in the shadows of organized crime, that difference can change everything. Jimmy Hoffa and the power struggle. He was supposed to be there at 2 o'clock, a summer afternoon in suburban Detroit. The parking lot outside the Machu's Red Fox restaurant shimmered under the July heat. Cars came and went. Diners walked in and out. Nothing looked unusual. Nothing felt historic. And yet, at 2:15, the most powerful labor leader in America was pacing near the curb, glancing at his watch, growing irritated. By the end of that day, Jimmy Hoffa would vanish into myth. But before we step into that parking lot, before we chase theories, suspects, and confessions, we have to understand who Jimmy Hoffa really was. Because his disappearance was not random. It was the final move in a long, tense chess match between ambition and control. James Riddle Hoffa was not subtle. He didn't operate in whispers. He didn't prefer shadows. He was loud, blunt, and fiercely confident. Born in 1913 in Indiana, raised during the Great Depression, he understood something early. Working men were disposable unless they organized. And once they organized, they became powerful. He joined the Teamsters Union in his early 20s. At the time, it was a fragmented collection of truck drivers fighting for wages and basic protections. Hoffa saw something bigger. Trucks were the arteries of America. If you controlled the drivers, you controlled supply lines. And if you controlled supply lines, you controlled leverage. By the 1950s, he had risen to the presidency of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. He didn't just negotiate contracts. He built an empire. The Teamsters Pension Fund ballooned into one of the largest pools of capital in the country. Billions of dollars flowed through it. And that money didn't sit idle. It funded construction projects, real estate, casinos in Las Vegas, skyscrapers, entire neighborhoods. Where large sums of money move, organized crime follows like gravity. The relationship between the Teamsters and elements of organized crime was not hidden. It was structural. Loans flowed to mob-connected developers. In return, the union enjoyed influence, protection, and, at times, muscle. Hoffa understood this dance. He wasn't naive. He believed he could control it. But control is a dangerous illusion when multiple power centers are involved. Throughout the 1950s and early 1960s, Hoffa grew more powerful and more controversial. He faced investigations, Senate hearings, public scrutiny. He sparred openly with Attorney General Robert Kennedy, who made it his personal mission to dismantle Hoffa's influence. Their feud became national theater. Hoffa framed himself as a champion of working-class Americans under attack by political elites. Kennedy framed him as the embodiment of corruption. In 1967, Hoffa was convicted of jury tampering and fraud related to pension fund dealings. He was sentenced to prison. For many in organized crime, this was inconvenient, but manageable. A leader behind bars is quieter than one on television. Hoffa entered federal prison in 1967. He expected to return quickly. Instead, he remained there until 1971, when President Richard Nixon commuted his sentence. The commutation came with a condition. Hoffa could not engage in union activities until 1980. That clause was critical. It was supposed to neutralize him. But Hoffa was not built for neutrality. He emerged from prison angry, resentful, and determined to reclaim his throne. He believed the presidency of the Teamsters was still his. That loyalty would snap back into place. That his absence had been temporary. But in his absence, structures had shifted. New leadership had solidified. Alliances had evolved. Organized crime families had grown comfortable with a more predictable arrangement. Stability had replaced volatility. Hoffa's return threatened that stability. Power is like a lake after a storm. When the surface finally becomes calm, no one wants another rock thrown into it. Hoffa was that rock. He began campaigning aggressively to retake the presidency. He traveled. He met with locals. He called in old favors. He openly criticized current leadership. And he underestimated the resistance forming beneath him. His relationship with Anthony Provenzano had deteriorated long before prison. Provenzano was a powerful Teamsters official in New Jersey with documented ties to organized crime. The two men had clashed repeatedly over authority, over influence, over ego. Their feud was not minor. It was personal. Prison only deepened the divide. While Hoffa was incarcerated, others consolidated power. By the time he returned, Provenzano and others had little interest in seeing him regain control. There were also larger concerns. Hoffa was unpredictable. He spoke openly. He challenged. He threatened exposure when cornered. To organized crime leadership, especially cautious figures like Russell Bufalino, unpredictability was risk. And risk attracts attention. The early 1970s were already a volatile time for organized crime. Federal investigations were intensifying. Wiretaps were improving. Prosecutors were more aggressive. The era of quiet operations was fading. A loud, defiant union leader attempting to reclaim power could destabilize everything. Hoffa refused to back down. He pushed harder. He met with figures across the country. He demanded meetings. He insisted on negotiations. He believed that, ultimately, they would accommodate him. He believed his past loyalty meant something. But loyalty in organized crime is conditional. It is not sentimental. It survives only as long as it serves stability. By 1975, tensions had reached a peak. Hoffa believed he could negotiate his way back into power. He arranged a meeting in Detroit for July 30th. The location, the Machu's Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township. The purpose, to resolve disputes with high-level figures who opposed his return. The names connected to that meeting would become central to decades of investigation. Anthony Provenzano, Tony Giacalone, Salvatore Bergoglio, all men with deeper, blood-bound ties to mafia families than Frank Sheeran ever possessed. Hoffa arrived early. Witnesses saw him pacing near a green Pontiac in the parking lot. He made calls. He complained about being stood up. He was irritated, not afraid. At approximately 2:30 in the afternoon, he disappeared. No gunshots were heard. No struggle was witnessed. No body was ever recovered. His car remained in the lot. It was as if the earth had opened quietly and swallowed him. The disappearance became one of the most investigated mysteries in American criminal history. Federal agents combed through leads, dug up properties, tapped phones, interviewed dozens of suspects. But here is the key detail. From the beginning, most investigators focused on Italian organized crime figures deeply embedded in Detroit and New Jersey, not on an Irish associate from Pennsylvania. That does not mean Sheeran was dismissed outright, but it does mean the weight of suspicion initially settled elsewhere. The logic was straightforward. Hoffa's primary conflicts were with men like Provenzano. The animosity was documented. Witnesses described threats, heated exchanges, explicit warnings. In organized crime, when disputes escalate to that level, resolution is rarely outsourced. It is handled internally. If Hoffa's disappearance was a coordinated operation, and evidence strongly suggests it was. It would have required trusted participants, men whose loyalty was unquestioned, men bound by oath. That structure favors insiders. Sheeran later claimed he was lured to Detroit under the pretense of a meeting, that he personally shot Hoffa in a house, that the body was cremated, that he was chosen precisely because he was trusted. It is a dramatic narrative. But before we evaluate that claim, we must sit in the reality of 1975. Hoffa was not just a man. He was an institution. Eliminating him was not a personal dispute. It was a structural decision, a removal designed to preserve equilibrium. Organized crime, contrary to popular imagination, often acts like corporate governance. When a volatile executive threatens long-term stability, a board intervenes. Quietly, decisively. The difference is that in this world, there are no press releases, only silence. And the silence after July 30th was absolute. Hoffa's family waited, hoped, then feared. His son James P. Hoffa would later rise to lead the Teamsters himself. But in 1975, the family was suspended between denial and dread. America watched. The mystery fueled headlines for decades. Search sites were excavated. Farm fields, stadium foundations, suburban backyards. Every new tip reignited speculation. And with each passing year, the legend grew. The absence of a body created space for narrative. Into that space, eventually, stepped Frank Sheeran. But as we close this chapter, we have to anchor ourselves in documented tension. Hoffa had powerful enemies. Enemies with motive. Enemies with structural authority. Enemies more deeply woven in a mafia hierarchy than Sheeran. This does not clear Sheeran, but it complicates him. Because if you remove Hoffa, you are not sending a message to a single man. You are sending a message to the entire ecosystem. And in ecosystems like this, the messenger matters. Was Sheeran that messenger? Or was he simply another orbiting figure who later stepped into the vacuum left by silence? The parking lot of the Machu's Red Fox returned to normal within days. New cars parked. New diners walked in. The asphalt forgot. But the power struggle that culminated there did not forget. It reshaped alliances, solidified new leadership, and left behind a question that would echo for half a century. Who decided Jimmy Hoffa had to disappear? And who, if anyone, pulled the trigger? A confession that would change everything, or complicate it beyond repair. The confession. I heard you paint houses. He says it without trembling. I killed him. No raised voice. No dramatic pause. Just a sentence that lands like a stone dropped into still water. An old man in a nursing home chair, oxygen nearby, hands folded neatly in his lap. The years have thinned him. The once solid build softened by age. But his eyes remain steady. He is talking about Jimmy Hoffa. And for a moment, the world leans in. Nearly 30 years after Hoffa vanished from that Detroit parking lot, Frank Sheeran begins to talk in detail. Not rumors, not vague suggestions. Details. Streets. Rooms. Words exchanged. The placement of the gun. 2 shots behind the ear. The body taken away. Cremated. Gone. If it is true, it is the answer to one of the most enduring mysteries in American crime history. If it is not, it is something else entirely. The confession did not happen on a stage. It did not break across television screens in real time. It unfolded gradually, through conversations with a former prosecutor turned author named Charles Brandt. Brandt met Sheeran in the late 1990s. By then, Sheeran was aging, health declining, relevance fading. The mafia world that once felt large and powerful had fractured under federal prosecutions. Many of its key figures were dead or imprisoned. Silence was no longer currency. Brandt listened. Over time, Sheeran began to open up. He described a lifetime of involvement in organized crime, not as an associate hovering near power, not as a union enforcer applying pressure at loading docks, but as a central operator, a man trusted with the most sensitive assignments. The title of the book that would emerge from these conversations was drawn from what Sheeran claimed was Mafia Code. I heard you paint houses. He said it was a way of asking if someone was willing to kill. Blood on walls. Paint. It is a vivid phrase. Memorable. Cinematic. It sticks in the mind. The book, published in 2004, positioned Sheeran not merely as a participant in the Hoffa disappearance, but as the triggerman, the man who walked into a Detroit house with Hoffa under the pretense of a meeting, the man who fired 2 shots at close range, the man who later watched as Hoffa's body disappeared forever. It was a story crafted with detail: the color of the carpet, the layout of the room, the timing of travel, the names of intermediaries. Sheeran described being flown to Detroit, being told by Russell Buffalino that Hoffa had become a problem, being instructed in the quiet, coded language of organized crime that something irreversible had to happen. According to Sheeran, Buffalino did not need to say the word kill. It was implied. The tone, the look, the pause. In this telling, Sheeran becomes indispensable, trusted above all others. The man chosen because Hoffa trusted him enough to walk into a house. That detail is crucial. Hoffa, according to the confession, would never have entered that house with a stranger. It had to be someone he believed loyal. Sheeran, it is a clean narrative, but narratives that resolve decades of mystery deserve scrutiny. Brandt believed him. In interviews, Brandt argued that Sheeran had no reason to lie. He was dying. There was no statute of limitations to worry about. Murder carries none. Many of the alleged co-conspirators were already dead. The risk seemed low. The incentive, at first glance, unclear. But incentives are rarely that simple. Relevance is a powerful motivator. Imagine living decades as a peripheral figure, near power, but never fully recognized. Watching your name fade as history writes itself around larger personalities. Then imagine being offered the chance to redefine your legacy, to step from the margins into the center of the most infamous unsolved crime of the 20th century. That opportunity reshapes memory. Sheeran's confession did not stop at Hoffa. He claimed involvement in numerous other murders. The killing of Joe Gallo in a Manhattan restaurant. Participation in dozens of hits over decades. Knowledge of broader conspiracies that stretched into political territory. Each claim elevated his stature. Each claim placed him closer to history's pivot points. But the more expansive the confession became, the more investigators began to question it. Let's focus first on Hoffa. Sheeran described a specific Detroit house as the murder location. In 2004, after the book's publication, law enforcement tested the house. They found blood traces beneath floorboards. For a moment, it felt like validation. A crack in the mystery. DNA testing followed. The blood did not match Hoffa. No physical evidence tied Sheeran to the scene. No weapon was recovered. No eyewitness confirmed his presence inside the house at the time of disappearance. Sheeran's timeline also encountered friction. Travel records did not align cleanly. Some accounts placed him elsewhere during critical windows. Phone logs did not fully support the sequence he described. Confession without corroboration is fragile. There is also the matter of credibility patterns. Sheeran claimed he killed Joe Gallo in 1972. Yet ballistics evidence and eyewitness account from that night suggest multiple shooters, none conclusively linked to Sheeran. Investigative reporting in later years cast doubt on his presence at all. He claimed involvement in other killings that could not be independently verified. In some instances, documented timelines made participation improbable. None of this proves he lied about Hoffa, but it introduces a pattern. Patterns matter. When law enforcement evaluates confessions, they look for external anchors, facts only the perpetrator would know. Physical evidence, witness overlap, independent verification. In Sheeran's case, those anchors are sparse. Supporters argue that the absence of evidence is unsurprising. Organized crime eliminates traces. Bodies disappear. Records vanish. That is true, but organized crime also leaves trails. Associates flip. Informants talk. Over decades, secrets surface, especially when a crime is this large, this destabilizing. And yet, no cooperating mobster has confirmed Sheeran as Hoffa's killer. Many who were closer to Detroit operations at the time have suggested alternative scenarios, involving Italian triggermen tied to New Jersey or Detroit families. If Sheeran were the chosen executioner, why does corroboration remain so elusive? There is another layer. The book is structured around conversations between Brandt and Sheeran. Brandt did not record every session. Much of the narrative relies on notes and recollections. That does not invalidate it, but it complicates forensic precision. Memory is not static, especially across decades, especially in men who have lived through war, crime, and aging. Memories shift. They compress. They rearrange. Sometimes they adopt details from stories heard over years. When a mystery like Hoffa's disappearance persists for decades, theories circulate. Law enforcement leaks possibilities. Journalists speculate. Over time, even those peripheral to events absorb fragments of the narrative. Separating lived experience from absorbed lore becomes difficult. And yet, the confession resonated. The public wanted an answer. Mysteries demand closure. An unsolved disappearance becomes a cultural itch. Sheeran's account scratched it. Hollywood noticed. In 2019, Martin Scorsese released a film adaptation titled The Irishman. Robert De Niro portrayed Sheeran. Al Pacino played Hoffa. Joe Pesci embodied Buffalino. The film leaned heavily into the confession as truth. It framed Sheeran as the tragic central figure, a loyal soldier carrying out orders that cost him personal relationships and spiritual peace. It was powerful storytelling, but film is not evidence. The cinematic portrayal cemented the narrative in popular imagination. For many viewers, Sheeran's guilt became assumed fact. Investigators remained unconvinced. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had spent decades pursuing Hoffa's fate. Agents combed through mountains of surveillance data, informant testimony, and forensic analysis. While theories evolved, Sheeran was never publicly identified by the Bureau as the primary suspect based on confirmed evidence. That silence is telling. Confessions can be strategic. They can elevate status. They can generate income through book sales. They can reshape how history remembers a man. Was Sheeran seeking money? Possibly. Book deals provide financial incentive. Was he seeking legacy? Almost certainly. There is also the psychological dimension of aging. As mortality approaches, some individuals attempt to impose coherence on their lives, to craft a narrative arc that feels significant, to convert decades of proximity into a singular, defining act. I killed Jimmy Hoffa. It is a sentence that guarantees remembrance. Contrast that with, I was an associate who applied pressure in labor disputes. Which story travels further? Which story ensures your name endures? None of this proves fabrication. It simply highlights motive. Brandt stood by Sheeran's account. He argued that Sheeran provided details consistent with law enforcement knowledge, that he described relationships accurately, that his proximity to Buffalino made selection plausible. Critics countered that plausibility is not proof. They pointed to inconsistencies, to the absence of DNA, to conflicting timelines, to the lack of supporting testimony from other insiders. The confession sits in a gray zone, compelling, but contested. As we move forward, one truth remains unshaken. Jimmy Hoffa disappeared. Organized crime had motive to remove him. Frank Sheeran was within the broader orbit of those networks. But orbit is not identity. The confession changes the tone of this story. It transforms Sheeran from peripheral associate to alleged architect of history. It invites us to view his earlier life through a different lens. Was the quiet truck driver always something more? Or did the myth emerge in the quiet of old age? When Sheeran died in 2003, he took whatever certainty existed with him. No new physical evidence surfaced. No definitive confirmation followed. Just a book, a film, and a sentence spoken softly in a nursing home chair. I killed him. In the next chapter, we will dissect that claim through the lens of forensic reality, examining timelines, travel records, and the stubborn absence of proof. Because in a case defined by silence, sometimes what is missing speaks louder than what is said. Chapter 5. The Forensic Problem. No evidence, no body, no match. They pulled up the floorboards carefully. Flashlights cut through the dim interior of a quiet Detroit house. Investigators moved slowly, methodically, as if history itself might crack under pressure. For nearly 3 decades, Jimmy Hoffa had been a ghost a missing man with a thunderous legacy. Now, in 2004, a confession had pointed directly at this address. This room, this patch of hardwood. If Frank Sheeran was telling the truth, this was where it happened. They found blood. That detail rippled outward fast. News reports ignited speculation. After years of dead ends, it felt like something tangible, something physical, a stain that might anchor the myth to reality. Then the testing came back. The blood did not belong to Jimmy Hoffa, not a match. And just like that, the floorboards went silent again. This is where the stories shift from narrative to scrutiny. Because confessions are powerful, but forensic evidence is stubborn. It does not bend to emotion. It does not care about legacy. If Sheeran shot Hoffa twice behind the ear in that house, as he claimed, the room should have remembered blood spatter patterns, bullet trajectories, trace evidence embedded in walls. Even after decades, modern forensic science can extract whispers from crime scenes. But there were no bullets recovered that matched such a shooting. No confirmed ballistic evidence tying Sheeran's account to that space. No verified trace that Hoffa had ever crossed that threshold. Supporters argue that cleanup crews could have erased evidence. That professionals know how to sanitize a scene. That cremation eliminates the body, the ultimate proof. All true in theory. But organized crime operations are rarely perfect. Mistakes happen. Residue lingers. Informants talk. The larger the conspiracy, the harder it becomes to contain. In the Hoffa case, the Federal Bureau of Investigation invested extraordinary resources. Surveillance files stretched thousands of pages. Wiretaps captured conversations across multiple states. Undercover informants fed details into the system. And yet, no confirmed forensic link has ever connected Sheeran to a murder scene involving Hoffa. No fingerprints, no DNA, no eyewitness placing him inside that Detroit house at the critical hour. Even the timeline strains under pressure. Sheeran described travel arrangements, being flown to Detroit, coordinating movements, positioning himself strategically. But travel records and witness accounts create friction. Some documentation suggests he was in Pennsylvania at moments that complicate his version. Not impossible to reconcile, but not clean either. Clean narratives rarely survive scrutiny. There's also the issue of phone records. Hoffa made calls from the Machu's Red Fox parking lot that afternoon. He complained about being stood up. He mentioned names. Those names centered around Italian organized crime figures with deeper ties to Detroit. Not Sheeran. If Hoffa expected to meet Sheeran that day, why did he not reference him in those calls? Why did his frustration appear directed at others? Perhaps Sheeran arrived later. Perhaps Hoffa was lured under different pretenses. Possibilities remain. But forensic analysis favors clarity, not imagination. Investigators also examined vehicle evidence. The green Pontiac Hoffa drove was dusted, processed, dissected. No trace tied it to Sheeran. No confirmed fiber. No latent fingerprint conclusively placing him in proximity at the critical window. In major organized crime prosecutions, physical evidence often emerges slowly. A weapon recovered years later. A cooperating witness describing burial sites. A hidden ledger discovered during unrelated raids. Decades passed. Nothing definitive surfaced connecting Sheeran physically to the act. Consider other organized crime murders from that era. Over time, many have been pieced together through layered evidence. Informant testimony aligning with forensic findings. Ballistics matching recovered firearms. Multiple witnesses converging on a single narrative. In Hoffa's case, that convergence has not occurred around Sheeran. There is also the broader context of how organized crime handles internal executions. When high-level targets are eliminated, the operation is structured to minimize risk. Trusted insiders are used. Logistics are compartmentalized. The fewer people who know, the better. If Sheeran were selected as triggerman, multiple participants would have been aware. Drivers, spotters, disposal teams. Decades later, at least one of those participants might have surfaced as a cooperating witness. Yet none have publicly corroborated his account. Silence can mean loyalty, but across the 1980s and 1990s, loyalty eroded under federal pressure. Major figures turn informant. Families fractured. The old code weakened. And still, no one confirmed Sheeran's role. Then there is the matter of the body. Hoffa's remains have never been found. Sheeran claimed cremation. Cremation is efficient. It erases forensic possibility almost entirely. But it requires coordination, access to facilities, timing, trust. Investigators have explored various disposal theories over the years. Burial beneath construction sites, compaction in junkyards, industrial furnaces. Each theory carries its own logistical challenges. Sheeran's cremation claim removes the need for a burial site, and with it, the risk of future discovery. It is a tidy solution, almost too tidy, because tidy solutions in chaotic conspiracies are rare. The absence of a body is both the reason the mystery persists and the reason Sheeran's confession cannot be conclusively disproven. Without remains, forensic closure is elusive. But absence of proof is not proof of presence. There is also the issue of consistency across Sheeran's broader claims. As mentioned earlier, he tied himself to other murders that lack corroboration. Investigative journalists who re-examined the record found discrepancies, witness accounts that conflicted with his positioning, ballistics that did not align. Each inconsistency chips at credibility. None alone destroys it, but together, they form a pattern of overreach. Patterns matter in forensic evaluation. If a suspect inflates involvement in peripheral crimes, investigators approach central claims with caution. Then consider motive alignment. If Hoffa's elimination was sanctioned by organized crime leadership to preserve stability, the operation would have been handled with maximum insulation. Selecting a non-Italian associate, someone outside formal blood ties, introduces vulnerability, not because associates are unreliable, but because structural loyalty carries different weight. Forensic logic intersects with organizational logic here. Who would be entrusted with the irreversible act? A soldier bound by oath, whose fate is intertwined with the family's survival, or an associate who, while trusted, remains structurally outside the core? Investigators familiar with mafia hierarchy lean toward the former. That is not prejudice. It is structural analysis. There is also a subtle but powerful question. Why confess at all? If Sheeran truly carried out the murder under orders from men like Russell Bufalino, silence will be consistent with mafia code. Omerta, the vow of silence, is not merely symbolic. It is cultural glue. Breaking that silence decades later would serve little operational purpose, unless the silence had already dissolved, or unless the confession served a personal narrative need stronger than allegiance. Forensic analysis does not evaluate psychology directly, but it does consider motive for confession. In some cases, false confessions emerge from desire for attention, from need for closure, from reshaped memory over time. This is not speculation without precedent. High-profile cases often attract confessions from individuals seeking relevance. What makes Sheeran different is his proximity to real organized crime networks. He was not an outsider fabricating contact. He did operate within that world, which makes the confession more plausible and more dangerous, because plausibility can mask embellishment. When investigators revisited Sheeran's claims, they found that certain details he provided were already part of public discourse. Law enforcement leaks over decades had revealed fragments of the working theory. It is difficult to determine whether Sheeran was offering insider knowledge or reorganizing publicly available pieces into a personal narrative. Forensic certainty demands something stronger than plausibility. It demands convergence. In the Hoffa case, convergence has not landed on Sheeran. It has circled around Detroit-based figures, around New Jersey intermediaries, around documented adversaries like Anthony Provenzano and Salvatore Bergoglio. The absence of physical evidence tying Sheeran directly to the crime scene does not exonerate him, but it weakens the claim of definitive authorship. And in criminal investigation, weakness matters. When the Detroit house blood failed to match Hoffa, a critical opportunity collapsed. It was the one tangible thread that might have woven confession into confirmation. Instead, it unraveled, Decades of excavation have produced holes in fields, trenches in suburban yards, concrete slabs broken open in search of bones. Each dig fueled headlines. Each disappointment deepened a myth. But myth thrives where evidence fails. The forensic problem is not just about missing DNA or mismatched blood. It is about the cumulative absence of independent verification. No body, no confirmed ballistic match, no cooperating witness testimony aligning with Sheeran's specific account, no travel record cleanly confirming his positioning at the crucial hour. In high-profile criminal cases, especially those investigated over multiple decades, the truth often leaves residue. Here, the residue remains ambiguous, which leaves us suspended between two uncomfortable possibilities. Either Sheeran executed a flawless operation that left virtually no trace and survived decades of scrutiny without corroboration, or he positioned himself at the center of a mystery that could never be conclusively disproven. In a world built on secrecy, both scenarios feel possible, but only one aligns cleanly with the weight of available forensic evidence. And that weight does not settle firmly on Frank Sheeran. As we move forward, we will examine the alternative suspects, the men whose motives, documented animosities, and structural positions may align more tightly with the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa. Because when physical evidence falls short, context becomes louder. And in the context of 1975 organized crime, the center of gravity may lie elsewhere. Stronger suspects. The call came from the parking lot. I've been here 20 minutes. Nobody showed. Jimmy Hoffa sounded irritated. Not frightened. Not cautious. Irritated. The summer sun was beating down on the asphalt outside the Machu's Red Fox restaurant. He had expected a meeting, a negotiation, a conversation that would clear the air. Instead, he was alone. The names he mentioned in frustration were not Frank Sheeran's. They were Anthony Provenzano and Tony Giacalone. That detail matters, because when investigators began reconstructing Hoffa's final hours, they did not start with Sheeran. They started with the men who had motive, the men who had direct conflict, the men who stood to lose if Hoffa regained power. Anthony Provenzano was not peripheral. He was not an associate hovering near influence. He was a Teamsters power broker in New Jersey with documented ties to organized crime. His feud with Hoffa was not subtle. It was bitter. Years earlier, while both men were in prison, witnesses described heated exchanges. Hoffa allegedly threatened to strip Provenzano of his union position upon release. Provenzano allegedly responded with threats of his own. In the ecosystem of organized crime, personal insults escalate quickly. But this was more than ego. It was power. Control over pension funds. Control over union influence. Control over streams of money that fed construction projects and, indirectly, criminal enterprises. If Hoffa returned to the presidency of the Teamsters, men like Provenzano would see their influence shrink. Contracts would be reshuffled. Alliances disrupted. For Provenzano, Hoffa was not just an annoyance. He was a threat. Then there were the Giacalone brothers in Detroit. Tony Giacalone was a respected figure within the Detroit crime family. Not loud, not theatrical, measured. Detroit's mafia structure was known for discipline, for efficiency, for minimizing unnecessary exposure. Hoffa's disappearance occurred in Detroit territory. Territory matters. Organized crime families guard their regions carefully. High-profile actions inside a territory require coordination with local leadership. They are not freelance operations. If Hoffa was lured to Detroit for resolution, the decision would likely have involved Detroit figures deeply embedded in that structure. Frank Sheeran, by contrast, operated primarily out of Pennsylvania. He was connected through Buffalino's networks. He was associated with Teamsters matters. But he was not rooted in Detroit's internal hierarchy. When the Federal Bureau of Investigation mapped potential suspects, the center of gravity leaned toward those with structural authority in the relevant territory. That gravity did not naturally settle on Sheeran. There is also Salvatore Bergoglio, a name less known publicly but heavy in investigative files, a close associate of Provenzano. allegedly volatile, experienced in violence, tied directly to New Jersey power struggles. Witness accounts over the years have suggested Bergoglio as a possible triggerman. The logic is straightforward. If Provenzano wanted Hoffa neutralized, he would likely rely on a trusted insider, someone whose loyalty was bound not only by association but by oath, someone who understood the stakes. In organized crime, when family interests are at risk, internal solutions are preferred. That does not exclude Sheeran entirely. He had access. He had credibility in union circles. Hoffa may have trusted him enough to enter a vehicle or house. That aspect of Sheeran's claim holds psychological weight. But proximity to Hoffa does not automatically equal selection as executioner. Consider the mechanics of such an operation. Hoffa is lured to a meeting. He is isolated. He is transported. He is eliminated. His body is disposed of without trace. Each step requires coordination. Drivers, watchers, cleaners, insulation between planners and action. In high-level organized crime hits, layers are intentional. They reduce exposure. If Sheeran were the shooter, who were the layers above and below him? Who transported the body? Who handled disposal? Who provided the location? Who cleaned the scene? Over decades, no participant has publicly confirmed that chain. Contrast that with other organized crime murders from the same era. Informants eventually provided granular detail. Who drove? Who fired? Who buried? The machinery of secrecy eventually cracks. In Hoffa's case, while theories have shifted, the consistent thread is internal mafia management, not outsourced labor. Another factor is cultural trust. The mafia's oath-bound structure is not merely tradition. It is operational security. When handling something as explosive as the disappearance of a national figure, loyalty must be unquestionable. Bloodlines, shared heritage, and ritual bonds reinforce that loyalty. Sheeran, as an Irish associate, existed outside that blood-bound core. He could be trusted for business, for enforcement, for labor pressure. But would he be entrusted with a decision that risked igniting federal fury across the country? Investigators skeptical of Sheeran's claim argue that such trust would be atypical. Not impossible, but atypical. The Hoffa disappearance triggered one of the largest federal investigations of its time. It intensified scrutiny on organized crime nationwide. The leadership would have anticipated that risk. They would have calculated accordingly. Selecting the shooter would not be casual. Then there is the emotional dimension. Hoffa and Provenzano's feud was personal. Anger sharpens decisions. Hoffa reportedly made threats, challenged authority, attempted to bypass established power structures. In a world where respect is currency, such behavior invites retaliation. Sheeran, by contrast, did not have documented personal animosity with Hoffa. In fact, he positioned himself as a friend, a loyal ally. That element supports his claim that Hoffa would trust him, but weakens the idea that he was personally motivated. In organized crime, personal motive is not always required. Orders flowed downward. But when evaluating suspects, motive aligns with opportunity and structure. Provenzano had motive. Detroit leadership had territorial control. Bergoglio had alleged capability. Sheeran had proximity. Proximity alone does not outweigh motive plus structure. There's also the matter of travel and alibi. Some evidence suggests Provenzano was not in Detroit that afternoon, but organized crime operations do not require physical presence of planners at the moment of execution. Orders can be issued remotely. Authority does not need to stand at the scene. If Hoffa was removed as part of a broader decision to preserve stability, the operational details could have been delegated to Detroit insiders. Again, this does not eliminate Sheeran, but it reframes the field. Over decades, investigative journalism has highlighted the Detroit family's discipline. They were known for careful planning and minimal leaks. If the operation occurred within their territory, it likely involved men deeply embedded in that network. Sheeran's confession positions him at the center of that network for a single act. But his documented history does not show sustained integration into Detroit's internal hierarchy. Investigators often return to the principle of least complication. When multiple suspects exist, the explanation requiring the fewest unusual deviations is often favored. Entrusting the job to an oath-bound insider within Detroit or New Jersey networks requires fewer structural deviations than selecting a non-Italian associate from Pennsylvania. That simplicity carries weight. Yet Sheeran's narrative persists. Why? Because it offers closure. It provides a single face, a single trigger, a human embodiment of an abstract disappearance. Without that face, the Hoffa mystery becomes diffuse, a committee decision carried out by layers of men whose names blur together. Sheeran simplifies the story, but simplicity is not necessarily truth. Over the years, law enforcement has continued to pursue leads tied to Detroit and New Jersey figures. Excavations in Michigan fields, interviews with former mob associates, tips from prison informants. The focus rarely centers on Sheeran as primary. The Bureau has never publicly endorsed his confession as definitive. That silence matters. If federal investigators, after decades of scrutiny, found Sheeran's account compelling enough to declare resolved, the narrative would shift dramatically. It has not. Instead, the case remains officially unsolved, which leaves us here, between a confession that captivates and a field of suspects whose structural positions make them equally, if not more, plausible. Anthony Provenzano died without admitting involvement. Salvatore Bergoglio was murdered in 1978, a fact that fuels speculation. Did he know too much? Was he silenced? Tony Giacalone denied involvement until his death. The layers remain intact, and in those layers, the center of gravity appears to rest among men more deeply rooted in mafia bloodlines than Frank Sheeran. But uncertainty is stubborn. Could Sheeran have been used precisely because he was outside the blood oath, expendable if necessary? Could his outsider status have provided insulation for higher-ups? It is a compelling counterargument. Yet decades later, no evidence has surfaced showing he was treated as expendable. No indictment, no public naming by prosecutors, no corroborating insider account elevating him to primary shooter status. The stronger suspects are not stronger because Sheeran is impossible. They are stronger because their motives, documented feuds, territorial authority, and structural positions align more tightly with the disappearance. And as we move toward the final chapters, one truth becomes unavoidable. The Hoffa mystery may not belong to one man. It may belong to a system that removes instability quietly, a system that values silence over spectacle. And in that system, whether Frank Sheeran was the trigger or merely a witness to power remains unresolved. But when weighing the evidence, the gravitational pull shifts away from him and toward the men whose authority ran deeper than proximity. In the end, the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa may not be about a single assassin. It may be about an ecosystem protecting itself, and ecosystems rarely reveal their secrets willingly. Chapter 7, Sheeran the Exaggerator, Pattern of Inflation. He sits in a chair like a man who has finally decided to stop holding things in. His voice is steady, deliberate, almost rehearsed. I was there, not just for Hoffa, for everything. The killing of Joe Gallo, the inner workings of the Mafia Commission, conversations that brushed up against whispers of political conspiracies, dozens of murders, a lifetime of blood carried quietly in memory. If Frank Sheeran is telling the truth, he was not simply an associate orbiting power. He was woven into the fabric of it. But when investigators and journalists began laying his claims side by side with documented history, something unsettling emerged. The pattern expanded, and then it stretched. Sheeran did not limit himself to one historic confession. He positioned himself at the center of multiple flashpoints in American organized crime. Again and again, he became the indispensable man in rooms where history turned. That pattern matters, because isolated exaggeration is human. Repeated inflation suggests something deeper. Let's step back. Before the Hoffa confession gained traction, Sheeran had already told stories about violence during the war, about executing prisoners under orders that blurred moral lines, The court-martial records confirm unauthorized killings. They do not confirm the scale or the emotional framing he later implied. War reshapes memory. It compresses events. It hardens edges. But it also builds a foundation for later narrative authority. I have killed before. It sets the stage. Then come the post-war years. Sheeran claimed involvement in the murder of Joe Gallo in 1972. Gallo, a flamboyant figure in New York organized crime, was gunned down in a Manhattan restaurant on his birthday. Multiple shooters were reported. Ballistics suggested several weapons. Witnesses described chaos, flashes, shouts, confusion. Sheeran inserted himself into that chaos as one of the men who fired. But investigative journalists revisiting the scene decades later struggled to place him there definitively. Witness descriptions did not match him cleanly. No cooperating mobster identified him as present. No forensic evidence linked him. Yet in Sheeran's telling, he was not merely present. He was decisive. This is where the pattern sharpens. Each claim elevates his centrality. He did not describe himself as a peripheral participant. He was always at the core. He claimed to have killed between 25 and 30 men over his lifetime. That number fluctuated in interviews. Sometimes higher, sometimes lower. It was rarely precise. Precision matters in truth. Imprecision thrives in storytelling. In organized crime history, prolific hitmen often leave trails, arrests, cooperating witnesses, law enforcement files rich with detail. Sheeran's record does not reflect confirmed convictions for murder. He served time for labor-related crimes, not for homicide. This does not mean he never killed. It means the documented record does not align with the scale he later described. Then there were the whispers of political proximity. Sheeran suggested knowledge of broader conspiracies, hints of involvement or awareness surrounding national political figures. These claims were vague but suggestive. They position him near seismic events, the gravitational pull of importance. Psychologists describe a phenomenon in aging individuals confronting mortality, the need to shape a coherent narrative of one's life, to impose meaning on decades that might otherwise blur into ordinariness. Memory becomes clay, not always deliberately, sometimes subtly. Imagine living decades near men whose names became legendary, sitting in rooms where decisions were discussed, watching alliances shift, feeling the heat of power without fully grasping it. Over time, proximity can morph into participation and recollection. The human mind is not a tape recorder. It is an editor. Investigative reporters who studied Sheeran's claims noticed inconsistencies across interviews. Dates shifting, travel details bending, sequences rearranged. Small discrepancies, perhaps understandable across decades. But when those discrepancies align with moments that inflate one's importance, skepticism grows. Charles Brandt, the author who chronicled Sheeran's confession, believed him. Brandt argued that Sheeran's calm demeanor suggested authenticity, that he had nothing to gain from fabrication. But that assumption deserves examination. Sheeran did gain something: legacy, recognition, book royalties, cultural permanence. Before the book, Frank Sheeran was a footnote in Union history. After it, he became a cinematic figure portrayed by Robert De Niro. His name entered global discourse. That transformation carries weight. It is not cynical to acknowledge incentive. It is realistic. There is also the social psychology of belonging. As an Irish associate in an Italian-dominated hierarchy, Sheeran existed perpetually on the threshold. Trusted enough to do business. Never bound by oath. Never formally inside. That structural exclusion can seed a quiet hunger. Not necessarily for money. For recognition. To be indispensable. To be the exception to the rule. When Sheeran described his relationship with Russell Bufalino, he framed it as intimate. Almost paternal. A mentor who trusted him with delicate matters. Yet no independent documentation elevates Sheeran above other associates in Bufalino's orbit. He was respected. He was useful. But was he singular? The pattern of inflation suggests a man who gradually repositioned himself at the narrative center. Even the title of the book, I Heard You Paint Houses, evokes a cinematic mystique, a code phrase dripping with atmosphere. Yet there is limited independent evidence that this exact phrase was widely used in mafia vernacular. It may have been, but its prominence in the narrative enhances drama. Drama sells. The challenge in evaluating Sheeran is that he did not fabricate from thin air. He was embedded in union politics. He did associate with organized crime figures. He did serve in war under violent conditions. The skeleton of credibility existed. He did not need to invent an entirely new identity. He needed only to shift emphasis. Move from "I was there sometimes" to "I was the one." That shift is subtle, but powerful. Investigators and historians must weigh cumulative probability. If a man repeatedly places himself at the epicenter of major events without independent corroboration, the burden of proof grows heavier. In Hoffa's case, the stakes are enormous. To accept Sheeran's confession as truth is to close the most famous unsolved disappearance in American labor history. Closure demands confidence. Confidence demands corroboration. And corroboration has remained elusive. There is also the element of selective memory. Sheeran rarely portrayed himself as incompetent, rarely described mistakes, rarely recounted moments where he was sidelined. The narrative arc positioned him as steady, indispensable, morally burdened, but resolute. Human lives are messy. Associates make errors. They are excluded. They are corrected. They are reprimanded. Those moments appear less prominently in his recollections. Instead, the story flows cleanly from war-hardened soldier to trusted enforcer to central triggerman. Clean arcs are satisfying, but real lives rarely adhere to them. Journalists who re-examined Sheeran's travel logs and employment records found stretches where his presence at claimed events was questionable. Not impossible, but strained. When confronted with these inconsistencies, defenders argue that records from that era are incomplete, that organized crime figures often traveled without documentation, that secrecy explains gaps. Again, plausible. But when explanation relies repeatedly on absence rather than presence, skepticism grows. One of the most telling elements is the silence of others. Organized crime families fractured under federal prosecutions in the 1980s and 1990s. Numerous insiders cooperated with authorities. They detailed murders, rackets, internal disputes. None publicly confirmed Sheeran as the prolific assassin he described. Silence can mean ignorance. It can mean loyalty. Or it can mean that his role was not as central as claimed. This chapter is not an indictment. It is an examination of pattern. And the pattern suggests inflation. Not necessarily fabrication of every detail, but expansion, magnification, a slow repositioning of the self at the heart of history. When Sheeran died in 2003, he left behind a narrative that could neither be fully proven nor fully disproven. The absence of a body protects his claim from definitive collapse. The absence of corroboration prevents definitive acceptance. He exists in the gray, but the gray becomes darker when viewed through cumulative context. A man who claims involvement in multiple high-profile killings without independent verification. A man who shifts timelines subtly. A man who stands to gain legacy through confession. A man who operated near power, but was never formally inducted into its core. Around power. But was he central? As we move into the final chapter, we must confront the possibility that Frank Sheeran was not the architect of the most famous mob hit in history. He may have been something more human. A man who lived in the shadows long enough to believe he was the one casting them. And in the quiet of old age, when silence no longer served purpose, he stepped forward and said what the world was waiting to hear. I did it. Whether that sentence reflects fact or longing remains the final question. And in the next chapter, we will sit with that uncertainty. Not as myth, but as reckoning. Chapter 8. The Myth versus the Man. The door closes slowly. An old man sits alone in a quiet room. Oxygen tubing resting against his cheek. The weight of years pressing down harder than any indictment ever did. There are no headlines here. No camera crews. No smoky back rooms filled with whispered orders. Just the hum of a nursing home hallway and the faint rhythm of breathing. This is how the story ends. Not with gunfire. Not with sirens. With silence. Frank Sheeran died in 2003. No trial. No conviction for murder. No final revelation stamped with legal certainty. Just a confession, a book, and a question mark large enough to swallow half a century of speculation. By the time Hollywood adapted his story, the myth had already begun to harden. In 2019, Martin Scorsese released The Irishman, a sweeping epic that treated Sheeran's account as emotional truth. Robert De Niro embodied the aging enforcer. Al Pacino brought Jimmy Hoffa to life with fire and stubborn pride. Joe Pesci portrayed Russell Bufalino as the quiet architect of decisions made in whispers. The film was powerful, tragic, intimate. It painted Sheeran as a loyal soldier trapped between friendship and obligation. A man who carried out orders because that was the life he chose. A man who lost his family's trust in exchange for the approval of men who ultimately faded away. It was cinema at its most persuasive, and for millions of viewers, it settled the mystery. Frank Sheeran killed Jimmy Hoffa. Case closed. But film is not verdict, and emotion is not evidence. When the credits roll, what remains is not certainty, but interpretation. The myth presents Sheeran as central. The documented record presents him as adjacent. Those two positions are not the same. He was born into working-class Pennsylvania, served more than 400 days in combat during the Second World War, joined the Teamsters, became involved in labor disputes, associated with organized crime figures, sat near power, observed it, benefited from it. All of that is real, but centrality requires something more than proximity. It requires corroboration, and the absence of corroboration defines this story. No body, no DNA match, no ballistic confirmation, no cooperating insider testimony aligning cleanly with his account. Over decades, law enforcement dug up backyards, farmland, industrial sites. Investigators chased rumors about concrete foundations and hidden burial grounds. They followed tips to New Jersey landfills and Michigan fields. Each time, they found dirt, not Hoffa. The mystery remained open, and in that open space, Sheeran's confession flourished. It offered closure in a world tired of ambiguity. But closure achieved through narrative is different from closure achieved through proof. The FBI has never publicly declared the case solved. No official announcement crowned Sheeran as the definitive killer. The disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa remains, in legal terms, unresolved. That matters, because myth thrives in unresolved spaces. If Hoffa's remains have been discovered, matched through DNA, linked through forensic chains to a specific weapon and shooter, this chapter would read differently. Instead, we are left with probabilities, and probabilities lean towards structure rather than singular heroics. Hoffa's disappearance likely involved coordination among organized crime figures deeply embedded in territorial authority. Men bound by oath, men whose motives were documented, and whose feuds were personal. Sheeran may have known about it. He may have been present at peripheral stages. He may have been closer than most. But the leap from peripheral knowledge to primary execution remains unsupported. And yet the human need for narrative resists that ambiguity. We prefer a face, a hand, a trigger, a single man carrying the weight of history. It is easier than accepting that a system moved quietly, efficiently, and erased a man without leaving one definitive fingerprint. Frank Sheeran's life, stripped of embellishment, is still compelling. A war veteran shaped by violence. A union man navigating the intersection of labor and crime. An associate who understood power, but was never fully embraced by its bloodline. He was not nobody, but he may not have been the somebody he later described. There is something deeply human in that possibility. To spend a lifetime near giants and still feel unseen. To age into obscurity while the men you once served become legends. To realize that history remembers names, not supporting roles. And to decide, in the final chapter of your life, that you will not be forgotten. Confession becomes authorship. Authorship becomes legacy. Legacy becomes myth. That does not make Sheeran a villain in this final reckoning. It makes him human. Memory is not static. It is elastic. It stretches to fill emotional gaps. It reshapes events to align with identity. In the quiet of aging, When mortality sharpens reflection, the mind can reinterpret proximity as participation. Perhaps he believed his own narrative. Perhaps he convinced himself over time that he had been central. Or perhaps he knew exactly what he was doing. We cannot peer inside intention. We can only measure evidence. And the evidence refuses to settle. There is also the broader question of cultural appetite. America has always been fascinated by organized crime. The codes, the rituals, the tension between loyalty and betrayal. Stories of mob enforcers offer a dark mirror to corporate hierarchies and political maneuvering. They provide structure to chaos. Sheeran's story fits that appetite perfectly. The quiet Irish outsider rising within an Italian-dominated underworld. The loyal friend forced to betray a stubborn union leader. The aging assassin haunted by choices. It is Shakespearean, but Shakespeare is not sworn testimony. The truth may be less dramatic, more bureaucratic, a committee decision, a delegated task, a body disposed of through industrial means, a system preserving itself without one man claiming the spotlight. In that version, Frank Sheeran remains what the record supports, an associate around power, important in his own orbit, not the axis. As this documentary closes, we return to the question posed at the beginning. He was around power, but was he ever central to it? The weight of evidence suggests he was closer to the edges than the core. Yet the myth endures, because it offers something the truth does not. Finality. When people watch The Irishman, they see a story with an ending. Hoffa dies in a quiet house. The shooter grows old. Regret lingers. Doors close softly. Real life rarely grants that symmetry. Jimmy Hoffa disappeared. Frank Sheeran confessed. The forensic record did not confirm. Investigators remain divided. History remains unsettled. And perhaps that is the final truth. Not that Sheeran was the greatest hitman of his era. Not that he was a complete fraud. But that he existed in the liminal space between fact and longing. A man who lived near legends and, at the end, stepped forward to claim legend for himself. The parking lot in Bloomfield Township still exists. Cars still park there. Diners still eat inside. The asphalt does not remember. But the question lingers. Did Frank Sheeran pull the trigger? Or did he simply pull the narrative toward himself? In the absence of a body, in the absence of proof, the story remains suspended. And in that suspension, myth and man blur together. The old man in the nursing home chair breathes quietly. The cameras fade. The mystery survives. And somewhere between silence and confession, the truth remains buried.
Before you go, if you enjoyed this documentary and appreciate carefully researched stories that separate historical fact from popular myth, you're exactly where you belong. Welcome to the Pizzaverse. Around here, we don't glorify organized crime. We don't rewrite history. And we don't chase conspiracy theories just because they make flashy thumbnails. We dig through the evidence. We compare the sources. We challenge the legends. Then we tell the story as honestly as the historical record allows. Whether we're exploring the hidden psychology of famous criminals, the forgotten truths behind fairy tales, the secrets of old Hollywood, or the real history of organized crime, our goal is always the same: to uncover what actually happened. If that's the kind of content you enjoy, help us keep growing. Hit like if you enjoyed the documentary. Subscribe if you haven't already. Ring the notification bell so you never miss a new investigation. And leave a comment below. Tell me, what old Hollywood story should we investigate next? As always, thank you for supporting independent documentary storytelling. The Pizzaverse keeps growing because of viewers like you. Until next time, keep asking questions. Keep challenging the myths. To every member of the Pizzaverse, Thank you. Seriously. There are millions of videos competing for your attention every single day. And the fact that you chose to spend your time here means more than you probably realize. Whether you've been here since the beginning or you discovered this channel 5 minutes ago, welcome to the family. Your views, your comments, your corrections, your discussions, and your support help keep these documentaries alive. Together, we're building something that values evidence over rumors, history over mythology, and curiosity over clickbait. Every documentary starts with a question. Every answer leads to another mystery. And we've only scratched the surface. If you enjoyed today's journey into old Hollywood, share it with someone who loves old Hollywood, Broadway history, or the fascinating world of Prohibition. The more people who discover these stories, the more forgotten voices get a chance to be heard again. From all of us here at Pizzaverse Studios, thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. And until next time, keep your curiosity alive. Keep your espresso hot. And remember, the spotlight may fade, but a great story never does. I'm Ghost. And as always, in the Pizzaverse, we don't rewrite history, we excavate it. I'll see you in the next documentary.